You walked in from the street, and the transition was immediate. You left behind the noise of the 1950s city, the grinding gears of buses, the whistles of traffic cops, the relentless pavement heat, and stepped into the cool, shadowed height of a lobby. Whether it was a grand department store like Woolworth's or a soaring office tower in Manhattan, the ritual was the same. You didn't look for a directory on a touchscreen. You didn't reach for a plastic button. Instead, you walked toward a set of heavy, polished brass doors, and you waited for the pilot of the vertical world to arrive. The elevator operator was a fixture of American life for nearly a century, yet they occupied a space that felt outside of time. In the 1950s, there were over 120,000 of them across the country. They were the human interface between the sidewalk and the sky. When the door slid back with a heavy, oiled grace, you weren't just entering a machine. You were entering a small, paneled room governed by a person in a crisp, military-style uniform, often wearing white gloves and a cap that sat perfectly level. They stood beside a large brass handle called a rheostat, and as you stepped onto the linoleum or the carpeted floor of the car, they would look at you with a practiced professional neutrality and ask the question that defined the era. Floor, please? To understand what happened to the elevator operator, we have to understand that they didn't just move a box up and down. They were performing a craft that was part technician, part social diplomat, and part safety officer. Before the middle of the 20th century, elevators were intimidating, complex pieces of machinery. They were not press-and-forget devices. To run an elevator in 1945 required a physical intuition. The operator had to know exactly how much to rotate that brass handle to accelerate the car without making the passengers' stomachs drop. And more importantly, they had to know exactly when to pull back so the car would stop perfectly flush with the floor. If they were off by even 2 inches, the passengers would trip, an embarrassing failure of the craft. Like the soda jerk at a fountain counter who knew exactly when to flip the grilled cheese without looking at a clock. The elevator operator lived in the rhythm of the machine. There was a specific social contract to the ride that mirrored other parts of mid-century life, like the corner drugstore or the telephone exchange. The elevator was a democratic space. For 60 seconds, a CEO in a tailored suit stood shoulder to shoulder with a mailroom clerk or a mother holding a toddler's hand. They all faced the doors, silent, trusting the person in the uniform to navigate the void. It was a low-pressure companionship, much like sitting at a lunch counter where you faced the same direction as the person next to you, part of a shared experience that required no performance and no sustained eye contact. You were simply present in a room full of other people going about their day. But the world was changing its rhythm, and the economics that built the role of the operator were beginning to unravel. The shift began not with a technological breakthrough, but with a labor dispute. In September 1945, just weeks after the end of World War II, the elevator operators of New York City went on strike. For 6 days, the vertical city stood still. Over 1.5 million workers stranded from their desks or lockers. High-rise life, it turned out, had a single point of failure: the person holding the handle. Building owners realized they were vulnerable to the rising cost of labor and the power of a unionized workforce. Just as the telephone companies realized that manual switching was becoming too expensive to scale as the network grew, property owners began to look at operatorless elevators as a financial necessity rather than a futuristic dream. The technology for automatic elevators had actually existed since the 1920s, but the public wasn't ready for it. People were terrified of phantom elevators. They didn't trust a machine to stop at the right floor, and they certainly didn't trust it to keep the doors from crushing them. This led to one of the most fascinating psychological marketing campaigns in American history. To make people feel safe without a human pilot, the industry had to add features that gave the passenger a sense of agency. They added the stop button, a big red emergency switch that promised the passenger they were still in control. They added telephones inside the car so you could call for help, replacing the comfort of the operator's voice with the promise of a connection to the outside world. And, perhaps most famously, they introduced Muzak. The soft orchestral covers of popular songs weren't there for entertainment. They were there to mask the mechanical groans of the car and to soothe the nerves of people who felt trapped in a driverless box. It was a sensory replacement for the human presence. By the early 1960s, the marketing of the push-button elevator began to mirror the rise of the discount store or the fast food franchise. Pushing your own button was framed as modern, efficient, and private. It was the same logic that drove the disappearance of the five-and-dime clerk who would unlock a glass case for you. Why pay for the service and the slow ritual of a human interaction when you could do it yourself and save time? The efficiency of the transaction began to outweigh the fabric of the day. The disappearance of the operator happened quietly, building by building. You'd walk into a lobby you'd known for years, and where there used to be a person in a uniform, there was now a plastic panel with numbered buttons. The experience of the ride changed from a guided journey to a non-place. In the manual era, the operator was a witness to the city. They saw the nervous job seeker, the celebratory couple, the tired clerk. When the operator left, the elevator became a room where we all agreed to look at the ceiling or our phones, avoiding eye contact, waiting for the ding that tells us we can leave. We gained speed and we lowered costs, but we lost the floor please that anchored the vertical world. The transition also reflected a change in how we moved through our weeks. The soda fountain and the newsstand thrived in an era of pedestrian proximity, when people walked through downtown as part of their daily circuits. The elevator operator was part of that system. They fed off the foot traffic of the department store and the office block. But as the population moved toward the suburbs and into buildings designed for cars rather than pedestrians, the need for a highly staffed, high-touch service model faded. In the new suburban shopping centers and office parks, things were designed to be self-service from the start. By the time the 1980s and 90s arrived, the elevator operator had been relegated to the world of extreme luxury. Historic hotels or high-end apartment buildings where the operator wasn't a pilot anymore, but a vertical concierge. They became a remnant of something that had already ended, much like the Saturday morning cartoon blocks that stayed on the air long after cable and VHS had made the ritual of the morning obsolete. The role didn't disappear because it was done poorly. It disappeared because the world it was built for, a world of walking, waiting, and human-mediated machinery, simply moved on. What Saturday morning cartoons, the drive-in, the movie Usher, and the telephone operator all shared was a frame around the time. They were rituals with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The elevator ride with an operator was the same. It started when the gate closed. It was sustained by the brief, polite interaction of the floor, please. And it ended when the operator leveled the car and slid the doors open. That boundary gave the morning a shape. It was a signal that you were moving from the public world of the street into the private world of your work or your shopping. Today, there are only a handful of manual elevators left in the United States, mostly in the halls of Congress or a few protected historic landmarks. They are artifacts of a time when we didn't just move through space, we were guided through it. The elevator operator lasted about 80 years as a staple of American life. They were built on a need for safety, sustained by a craft of movement, and ended when the laws of economics and the pull of automation made the human element a luxury the market was no longer willing to pay for. If you remember riding in a manual elevator, the specific metallic smell of the old cab, the heavy clack of the brass gate, or the way the operator could land the car so perfectly you didn't even feel it stop, those details are worth keeping. Every household in every city had its own version of these quiet rituals. The morning is gone, the world has moved on, and the next floor is waiting. But for a moment, in the mid-century lobby, the doors are still open. The operator is waiting, and the question remains, floor, please?